Hi, I'm Chris Ketzley, Executive Director here at the Association of Towns. Talk of the Towns podcast is a production of the New York State Association of Towns and strives to bring the voices from across New York to talk about all things towns. If you're interested in participating as a guest, please email us at info@nytowns.org. The views and opinions expressed by podcast guests are of their own and do not necessarily reflect the views, positions, or policies of the New York State Association of Towns. Hello, welcome back to another edition of Talk of the Towns, where we talk all things towns here on this podcast. And today we have a very important topic for you. We have a guest from NYMIR, which is a very important program to the association, obviously. But Elisabeth Dubois is here to talk about cybersecurity, which is becoming an increasing issue for our towns across the state. And so before we get to Elisabeth, I just want to remind you that you can find us on Apple platform, you can find us on Spotify, and certainly YouTube. Whichever platform you choose, we ask that you do your typical hit like, share, and subscribe. Like, share, and subscribe. That helps us get the word out on all things towns. And so great guest with us here today. We have Elisabeth Dubois. I'm going to turn it over to Elisabeth in just a moment, ask her to introduce herself. But as I said, she's with NYMIR, which is actually Right Risk Management, which is the TPA for NYMIR. And Elisabeth and her team do a tremendous job running a phenomenal program that the association is involved with. And many of you take great advantage of that product, the NYMIR product. So Elisabeth, you want to talk a little bit about yourself? Welcome.
Yeah. Thank you again for having me today. So my name is Elisabeth Dubois, and as stated, I'm the cyber risk specialist for NYMIR. So in my role with NYMIR, I handle all things cyber, so training, communication with members, brokers, risk management, applications, underwriting, help with claims management, kind of anything that you could think of that kind of has to do with cyber. So within this role, I bring both a technical and non-technical approach to cybersecurity, which kind of comes from my prior professional work and academic research. My passion for kind of about 6 years now has been local government and cybersecurity, deep dive into New York State in particular. I have a bachelor's degree in digital forensics, so there's the technical side of things, an MBA, and then a Ph.D. in information science with a focus in cybersecurity. So I try to bridge kind of the technical and non-technical gap. And kind of on the side, I work as a professor, adjunct professor at the University at Albany in both cybersecurity and homeland security.
It's all very impressive and very timely. We know this is a growing issue for everybody, but in particular here, we're here to talk about towns. So thank you for joining us, and thank you for that great background, because obviously very qualified to talk about this issue. Elisabeth, I wanted to start with, I think sometimes towns don't see the connection between cybersecurity or getting insurance for cybersecurity and maybe their credit rating, right? So Moody's is starting to kind of take into account cyber hygiene into their municipal bond rating, which can affect a town's finances, obviously. So, if a town suffers a breach and they haven't had the proper authentication verifications or outdated training, what ends up being really the cost to the town for a lack of cybersecurity policy?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So when we think of a cyber incident, say, let's think of ransomware, that's often the ransom itself is often the smallest check a municipality writes, even though it's not recommended for local governments to pay. That's going to be the smallest amount you see. So it's going to be the long tail cost that we call it. That's going to be reputation, creditworthiness, and kind of those long associated costs. So credit agencies are starting to treat cyber hygiene as almost a proxy for management quality. So if a town fails to implement, say, multi-factor authentication, the analysts will see it as a lack of financial oversight. So kind of an example here would be if a breach led to like a single notch downgrade in a let's think a $10 million bond for a new highway garage, the increased interest costs over like a 20-year period could exceed $500,000. So
Wow.
that would be a permanent cyber tax on every resident in the town. So again, oftentimes we don't think of cybersecurity. We kind of think of it in the silo of IT, but it is so much broader than IT alone.
So a town maybe can address those concerns or those threats, right? With, is it multi-factor authentication stuff? Is it making sure their folks are trained? Is it having proper .gov, and maybe proper insurance? What can a town do to begin to make sure Moody's and others are looking at their cyber policy, security policy, and making sure they're up to where they need to be?
So the big thing here is you don't want to wait till the what if. You don't want to wait until an incident does occur. Too often I see municipalities, not just towns, but they wait until sadly an incident occurs to really put the money in and put the money aside to really put that IT cyber evolution in place. So I'm not going to say just buy new laptops beforehand, but make sure you have that 24/7 like EDR or managed detection and response. Have legal counsel on the ready. Understand the SHIELD Act for New York State. So understand the ins and out of security. Make sure you have strong passwords. There's so many simple things that can be done that don't cost money. It just takes time. So
Yeah.
there's a lot of different factors in that.
And you said earlier, ransom ends up being the lowest payment. Is that correct?
Yeah, so the ransom itself, like I said, say it's Bitcoin, they're asking for maybe $1 million. That's often we've seen, say the ransom's $1 million, not you shouldn't pay it as a local government, but then the actual recovery cost we've seen upwards. We've seen Suffolk County at 25 million plus. We saw Atlanta, Georgia at 17 million plus. So that's pretty much a big portion of municipal budgets spent simply on the recovery from one incident.
Wow. Astonishing. And yeah, we're living in a world with AI and deep fakes, and so how easy it is for someone to take a clip from a board meeting and, produce someone else's voice and maybe even likeness. You know, how does a town guard against something like that? Like getting a call, maybe the comptroller gets a call from the supervisor saying, move $12 million or whatever. Uh, and it sounds just like the person. How does that fit into the cybersecurity policy?
That's a great question. That's actually where we start to see crossover between crime and cyber policies in general and insurance. So we see kind of it would be labeled either e-crime for cyber or your crime policy. And this is actually where we're seeing the number one threats kind of across the country for local government, where ransomware definitely is still critical. It's definitely business email compromise or wire fraud. So it may simply be someone pretending to be the town judge and saying, can you change my direct deposit information? Maybe it's only a few $1,000 loss, but in other instances, we've seen cases where they pretend to be a vendor. Can you change our vendor payment for this $17 million and have it transferred to this account instead? And that's really it's a tough and sadly it's an easy situation to happen unless there's policies in place to verify those transfers. So the big thing and the most important thing in kind of to prevent from this is to make sure you have secondary verification. So whether it's a policy or just a procedure, the comptroller, the treasurer, or whoever's in charge of those finances has. So if something is requested to be changed, you call the known number or the known person to verify, okay, that was indeed a legitimate request and we can go ahead with this transfer. Because when you don't have that, that's going to actually void coverage in a lot of cases. So a lot of crime and or cyber policies, not just with NYMIR, but in a lot of carriers are going to void coverage if you do not verify the transaction with either an out-of-band phone call or kind of a lot of people are using token requests. And I know a lot of towns in particular have started to say, we're not going to change anything unless you come in person and request a change face to face, which again, I'm all for that. It's going to give you the best level of security. So.
What about good old fashioned, code words and secret word phrases and things like that? Is that something you would suggest?
Yeah, so that's definitely another option. I know there's a handful of municipalities that definitely use that. Um, so like I said, there's the variations depending on the size. I know towns vary in size, so if you don't have the resources to necessarily do out of band verification, you want to have someone come in person, or if you want to just have a kind of a code word that only your trusted vendors and employees know, then that's okay. Again, our goal at NYMIR and kind of my goal is to make sure cybersecurity is not a one size fits all. It's a really unique process that has to fit with what you're able to do at your town.
So really, there's two things we're talking about here. One is a cybersecurity policy that you want to have in place to make sure you prevent any cybersecurity issues. But then also, there's the other side of it of cybersecurity insurance and making sure that you have the right coverages in place. How does a town know, municipality know what they should be covering, what limits, what might be the biggest threats, and really what does that deal with as far as the loss the town is going? I mean, does the insurance pay the ransom? Does any maybe walk us through how the insurance coverages work?
Yeah, definitely. And I think the answer to kind of that first question, what type of coverage do we need, is sadly a personal question. Again, obviously, the more coverage you have, the potential more money you're going to get in the event of an incident. But not every municipality, not every town's going to need necessarily a $1 or $2 million policy. If you're a small town with less than 1,000 residents, not a huge kind of foothold or like foundation on the internet, then you don't necessarily need that. 250,000 would be sufficient. So with that, kind of what you want to look for in a standard policy is going to be your first party coverages. That's going to be what's going to be most applicable to you. And that's going to cover kind of your breach response, your forensics, basically all the big ticket and big money items you see in the news. There's going to be third party losses, which, knock on wood, we haven't really seen across the country and local governments really use too much. And then e-crime, as I mentioned earlier, that's going to be your biggest area and for concern right now. So you want to make sure. And the big thing to pay attention to is the deductible. So a lot of policies that may not be something considered. I've seen policies with $30,000 deductibles, which for a town that can be a pretty heavy lift. So we try to keep it between $1,000 to $5,000 deductibles at NYMIR. And like I said, it's going to vary really dependent on what you need, but you really want to check for the so extortion or ransom coverage. But the big thing that I want to note here is for local governments and the public sector, both federal and state governments do not recommend you pay the ransom. So while you want to see a good number, I understand that it's not really, I don't want to say useful, but it's only used to pay the ransom. So if you're not really recommended to pay it anyways, that number really is void. So the one thing I would say with that is if you do choose to pay the ransom, you do have to work with your insurance carrier. Otherwise, they're not going to kind of reimburse for that ransom payment. So a lot of these things you work with your insurer to figure out breach counsel, to figure out a lot of these services you're going to use beforehand. You're not going to just hand them a bill afterwards. That may not be the best way forward.
What is the rationale for not paying the ransom? Is it that you don't want to encourage it, or what is the thought behind that?
Yeah, so the big thing about ransomware or cyber criminals in general, you're placing your trust in a criminal. So you're going to pay the ransom. They're going to say, okay, you pay the ransom. You're going to get the encryption keys. You're going to be able to unlock your data and your systems while you're placing your trust in the criminal. We've seen plenty of cases where they may give some data, not all. They may still sell your data afterwards. They may give faulty keys. And once that money is gone, you're not going to get it back. And two is when you do pay a ransom, you just make yourself a bigger target. And then you just help fund the ecosystem of cyber criminals. And again, depend on who actually is attributed to the cyber incident. If it is a nation state, then there's going to be more laws on top of that as well.
So it's true there is no honor among thieves.
Sadly, you may find it, but you may not.
Good advice, no doubt. Um, so we've been talking a little bit about, um, data recovery and protecting data and whatnot. But the other aspect to this is really continuity of government. Local governments have to continue to deliver the services every single day, critical services, the plows on the street, the marriage certificates being issued, and so forth and so on. Um, do you think that there's enough conversation on the local level in particular about how to deliver all these services without systems anymore? Kind of like delivering 21st century services and 19th century tools. Does a town need to think about that and talk about that more?
That definitely, I would say, is one of the most critical conversations you have to have, no matter the level of government. And towns and villages are going to be the most critical in this. And the fact that a lot of times you may confuse IT disaster recovery. So you want to get the servers, you want to get your data back online as quick as possible. And that's often confused with continuity, which is keeping the lights on while the servers are dead. So maybe it's only a couple hours, but we've seen plenty of cases where systems are attacked and it takes months to get back everything online. So if you are hit by ransomware, you're effectively going to travel back to 1980s for a couple weeks. And if that's the case, do you have a physical backup of your previous pay periods roster? Can you manually cut emergency checks to ensure police and highway crews can pay their own bills in this time? I know kind of town and local governments have really become reliant on digital map and technology in general. So, if the highway superintendent's tablet is a brick, basically, are there actual maps in the trucks that they can use? If the water department's SCADA system is locked, do you know which manual valves to turn to prevent a water main burst? So, there should be, I always like to say, a go bag at the ready. And this should be not just for a fire or emergency like that, but for a digital blackout. Every department head, and again, if you're a smaller town, you should have a physical binder that contains everything you need. So this should be emergency contact trees. So any personal cell phones, not just office extensions, because if you're offline, you most likely won't have those paper templates. So anything for essential forms that are needed. And then vendor lists. So for critical things, so salt, fuel, chlorine. What we see a lot is cyber criminals are going to go after towns and municipal governments when they're at their most critical point. So when you have a huge winter storm coming, they're going to try to attack you because they know you're so maxed out and so busy. So with that, you're going to have to manage that critical event and also manage this cyber incident. So you kind of have that go bag at the ready is just going to save so many steps in the future.
Is where old folks like me come into play, where we have old-fashioned technology we're comfortable with, paper and you know rotary dial phones or whatnot. We'll be ready. We'll help you with continuity of your operations. Um, are there resources? I know NYMIR does a lot to train their subscribers. I don't know if the state has a resource hub for local governments, but where can a local government? I know many of them have their own IT people potentially, but a lot don't. Where can they turn to get help?
That's a great question. So there's definitely the New York State Department of Homeland Security. Their CERT team is spectacular. They offer free tabletop exercises and a lot of free resources, and they just have a great team. CISA also has some great programs that the local governments can take advantage of. And then, given the gap you just identified, myself and a group of colleagues that represent municipal governments across the country kind of got together, worked on a paper to really address the questions elected leaders had, and we created an alliance of sorts. Um, Website, all that really hopefully elevates the discussion of cybersecurity and provides countless resources for not just your IT but also for those elected officials, for your treasurer, for every member of your municipal government. And that's really the goal of this kind of alliance and this group, is really to provide all these resources online to really answer a lot of the questions in pretty layman's terms that can be understood, because oftentimes IT, if you get technical information, a lot of us, it's hard to digest and understand what it means. So if we can break that down into terms, we can understand, okay, this is why you need a backup, this is how you do it, and these are the steps you should take. And that's kind of where we're trying to start to fill some of those gaps.
That's great. And, for the NIOT subscriber out there, member, NYMIR subscriber, NIOT member, we've teamed up and we do a lot of training on this. I know at our schools, we have finance school where we talk about it. We have our annual meeting down in New York City just this past February where it's on the agenda. So we continue to educate our members on this. So, as you are members listening, please reach out. NYMIR is a tremendous resource, and they help us in training on these issues at our schools. So watch the website for some of those opportunities coming up too. So obviously, now let's go forward, say you have your insurance in place. Now comes up time for renewal. I just did this with my car and homeowners insurance. I had to attest that I don't have any new drivers or anything else like this. So obviously there's going to be an opportunity for the carrier to have an attestation from the state, from the town, that things are in place, right? But a supervisor, I was a supervisor for a long time. I know every day it's, a lot coming at you. Maybe he or she didn't have a chance to confirm that a third party is necessarily doing multi-factor authentication or something. Does that, so you sign, you attest to that, but it's really not true, but it wasn't on purpose breach, but you just weren't sure. And does that void coverage going forward if someone attests to something that isn't quite true?
And that's a tough problem. And NYMIR, we try to work with members and kind of myself. People probably hear from me too much, but I try to work with them to try to answer all those questions before they attest and before coverage is bound. So the big question we have here is, a lot of times it's simply a knowledge gap. They don't know what they have, what services are provided, and who has control of what, which that's no one's fault. That's simply just a knowledge gap. So with that being said, if you do attest that security controls are actually in place, that is a means to create a contract that could be voided. So in that regard, say a claim came in, you attested you had MFA in place for remote access, and it is found out that the breach occurred because you actually did not have that in place. That would be a material misrepresentation, and that would kind of void your coverage. Some insurers actually use a forensic audits after a breach to verify the attestations. And I don't like saying this, but silent killer clause is what I usually say. And if they find the entry point was like that non-MFA vendor, as you said, they can deny the claim, and that leaves the town to fund the entire recovery from their tax base. And like I said, if it's only a few $1,000s, not a huge deal if they have a $1,000 deductible. But if you're getting to that $1 million, $2 million loss and they have to fund it, where is that money going to come from?
Right. Wow, that is definitely something that puts a town in a difficult situation, because when you think, how does a town necessarily, how are you able to verify all your third-party vendors? And if they're not verified, what does the town do? They have to go find a new vendor? What's their recourse on their own vendors?
And that's the problem. So a lot of vendors, you're at the will of a lot of vendors. So some vendors that are commonly used may not offer MFA for remote access. You have like police departments are typically necessarily siloed kind of systems from general towns. We have courts, again, separate typically. So when an application is answered, very few come in and break down, okay, this is what the police does, this is what the courts does, this is what kind of town hall does. So again, it's more kind of the trust. And like I said, uniquely like NYMIR does work with each member, kind of phone call, video calls, kind of, or in person to really discuss and go through the application and help them hopefully iron out any holes or gaps in their security prior to a renewal or binding coverage. So like we're very well adapted to the New York Shield Act, the CJIS policy for law enforcement. So there's a lot of cyber and kind of IT security that all law enforcement agencies have to follow through with. And if they don't, the FBI can pull access to criminal justice databases entirely. So there's a lot of ins and outs that are not necessarily common knowledge. So there's a lot that needs to be done or that is mandated or required that just kind of falls through the cracks because with a town government, there's a lot of priorities.
Yeah.
What we see with cybersecurity often is it's not going to be a visible return on investment. So it's hard. With a pothole in the road, the town can patch it and the residents will be happy. But with cyber, unless something goes wrong, you don't know it's really there. So it's not really that visible return on investment for both the public and your residents or the town itself.
So we said earlier that it is not a set and forget, right? This is not a set and forget type of situation. And I think NYMIR, for folks who are NYMIR subscribers, have a tremendous resource with NYMIR helping towns through these issues and all municipalities that NYMIR serves. But really, I just want to point out, pause a moment and just point out to supervisors, town board members, clerks, whoever is listening to this right now, how important this is. You're giving so many good pointers, but such good information that really I think a town hasn't thought about before, and about how susceptible they are, and not thinking about your third-party vendors. You think in your mind, you think that's someone else, you think that's their problem, but it's really the town's problem. And so these are all good things to make sure that our towns are aware of and are addressing in their cyber policy, cybersecurity policy, and in attaining cybersecurity insurance. Elizabeth, you mentioned something remote work, obviously kind of, a new thing relatively new for the workforce. Do you find that remote work has encouraged more cybersecurity or made it easier? I'm sorry, more cyber crimes and made it easier for cyber crimes? And then also on the second part of that question, people use VPNs, right? Is that false security, or is that really a nice, safe way to do business, and you should be confident in it?
Yeah, no, I definitely think the COVID era and kind of in the past 5 years, we've seen a huge uptick in remote work, which it definitely has changed productivity levels and definitely has opened up a lot of options and opportunities for not only municipalities, but businesses around the globe. With that being said, it has opened up more avenues that cyber criminals can take advantage of. Anytime, it's the same as AI. Anytime you open up kind of new technologies or new options, it's going to increase the threshold that cyber criminals can take advantage of. So while a VPN is definitely great, a VPN or any remote access without MFA on top of it is going to pretty much open up your municipal government or your town to potential risk. So if you're not using remote access, make sure ports are closed. If you are using it, make sure MFA is in place. So a lot of times IT may remote into your systems. Make sure they use MFA. If that's vendors may remote in. So I know if you rely on county or state, MFA may not be available, or if it is, it may not be in place. Make sure, word of advice, I know it creates a headache and sometimes an extra step to do, but wherever you can put MFA in place, especially if it has sensitive information, so banks, anything that has PII that is protected under kind of state and federal statutes, or protected health information, all of that should have that secondary verification to make sure that it does not fall into the wrong hands.
What are some examples of MFA for the folks out there? What would they employ there?
Yeah, so the most common is actually a text message. So you can set it up to your personal device and have them text you. I personally would veer away from that because that also has a few more risks to it. The best option would be to have an app. So Duo, Microsoft Authenticator on your mobile phone. So you go to log in to say your email and it's going to send a code to that app. Then you're going to type that code into your computer to get in. That is going to be probably your most secure. There's also security tokens you could use that are physical devices that you would have to bring to get into your systems, get into your email. Again, another great option that does cost a little more money, but like I said, there's options that should work for each of you. I know for some towns, having personal devices used for MFA can be a challenge. So there are some options we can definitely discuss. Like I said, NYMIR has a cyber guide that's, I think, 100 pages that breaks down kind of all the things you can do, services you could use, and some of the reputable companies that we see a lot of local governments across the state use.
So that's one strategy. What would you say, Elisabeth, is probably a town's biggest vulnerability? I'm gonna on a limb. I want to guess. I want to say phishing, right? Links that come into you. That's what I'm gonna say. But what is their biggest vulnerability?
Nope, that you're 100% correct. So
I must have took cyber training somewhere along the way.
People are going to be your biggest risk. But at the same time, I hate when people say, oh, people are your biggest weakness. They're not. They're actually your biggest strength. So your employees and your elected leaders and everyone from your highway department to your kind of that DPW to your elected officials are going to be your biggest strength. So if you train them, if you give them the tools to succeed, they're not only going to keep your town safe, but they also are going to put you in the best possible position to protect both your finances and your reputation. So again, it's as simple as having and now it's under New York State law, it's mandated, but train them and make sure that they're aware of who to call and who to report if something does go wrong. Because and at the end of the day, it's a huge risk, and it's not an IT issue. It's a fundamental pillar of your financial duty to your taxpayers. So having everyone on board and everyone that understands. I know sometimes it's hard to get buy-in from everyone on what cybersecurity is and what it's not, but that really is your duty as a town supervisor, board member, department head to really get everyone to understand and buy into cybersecurity.
And I think one of the more vulnerable places that can happen, by the way, is probably with social media. So, people, I know towns will have, they'll block sites, right? They'll go on and they'll block certain sites, but then this Facebook or Instagram or TikTok or whatever becomes a question because that's really also a communication tool for the town. But yet it's also probably one of the biggest vulnerabilities a town has. How should towns approach social media? Communication tool, but also big phishing opportunity.
Sadly, it's a very gray area because as we push for more transparency in local government, we also have to pair that with caution because as we're more transparent with information, we have to make sure that your personal information and employee information, everything remains protected. But at the same time, social media is used. I know a lot of municipalities use it day to day. But where we start to see challenges is when social media, your private social media, we all share information. So it may be family photos, details, and those details often are where your cyber attackers are going to go to find maybe what your passwords could be, what your security question answers could be. So it's not just a question of social media on the public side of your local government, but also as an employee of a town, you also have to use caution when using your private page, especially if you have public posts, because sadly, that's what most cyber criminals are going to use to kind of, I want to say catfish, but to do phishing emails and to say, oh, long time no talk. And kind of, we saw each other at this family picnic and and then they break it all down. And from first glance, oh yeah, I don't remember, but maybe. And that's where things start to spiral. So that's where you really have to be careful what's posted, but at the same time, you have to nowadays really use social media and engage with the public, especially nowadays. So it's a very tough balancing act.
Yeah. It's tough. Those questions, I just signed up for something. I won't say what, because I don't want anybody out there to try to hack it. But I had to answer a bunch of like security questions, and they're becoming harder and harder to answer because some of the easier ones, right? What's your favorite sports team? Anyone goes to my Facebook knows what my favorite team is. So those are too easy. You don't want to answer those. But then they had really difficult ones like who's your favorite composer? And I'm like, you're assuming I'm cultured here. Those really aren't easy to answer either. So you don't want to answer things that are too hard to remember. It's a balance, right? It's tough. You don't want to answer. I think the point is don't answer the questions that are super easy that can be gleaned from a social media, going to your Facebook and seeing who your favorite team is and all that kind of stuff. But make sure you remember those questions because they're important. You mentioned the state mandate and training. I know there was a .gov mandate. The association actually supported that because we felt that it was important enough. It was, critical to get to move away from the, townname.org. Can you talk a little bit about how that .gov protects towns a little more and what the return on investment might be for a town to move? I mean, they have to, but move into that realm away from the .orgs and the .coms.
Yeah, definitely. So the mandate is by New York State. It mandates that towns with populations over 1,500 move to the .gov by December 21st of 2025. So really, why does this matter to both you and the residents? And uh, kind of when a citizen receives an email, say about their property taxes from a .gov address, this is a guarantee. So only verified US government entities can own a .gov domain. So anyone can buy a .org or create a fake Yahoo account. So that .gov gives you that legitimacy. Kind of then there's technical aspects to it. So as anti-spoofing, so .gov domains automatically added to kind of a preload list, meaning browsers only connect via secure HTTPS, and I won't make this too technical, but and there's also a lot of enforcement within that that makes it much harder for scammers to spoof, say, a supervisor's email address to trick any staff. So if we use a public email for, say, town business, it's similar to wearing a fake Rolex to a bank meeting. It looks apart from a distance, so you have that kind of email, but the moment you look closely, the lack of quality, or in this case, security, is pretty obvious. So this is going to signal to hackers that your town may be a soft target and that it may not take digital identity seriously. Whether that's true or not is not the question, but that's what hackers typically are going to think.
Mhm. Absolutely. This has been very enlightening. We've gone over our time a little bit because I think how important this has been for our members to hear these things. There are some things that maybe have not been on their radar that are important to be. So this has been great. Elisabeth, is there a place that, say, a member's listening to this right now, or a member or a subscriber, that they can go to at NYMIR to get more information, to try to get more, learn more about your insurance program? Where can they go to get more information?
Yeah, they can go to our website, and that will be a great place to start. They can contact me directly, as always. So my phone number, email. And what we do have is, if you do kind of check out Facebook or Instagram or LinkedIn, we do post a lot of kind of cyber tips and bulletins and alerts on that, as well as other areas of coverage. But if you kind of want to stay up to date, we have a mailing list that you could get on for cybersecurity in particular, that's going to send out alerts of anything you need to be aware of and any bulletins.
Do you want to share your email here, or?
Yeah, I can.
Okay, go right ahead.
So it's Dubois, Dubois, at rightinsurance.com.
And Wright is WRIGHT.
Yes.
Yes. Excellent. Is there anything that we didn't mention that you think is important to talk about?
I think the only thing I would say is, well, as towns, what really needs to be done is we have to move really from just backup data to that resiliency. And at the end of the day, if you look at your residents, they're not going to care how fancy your servers are. They're going to care that their water stays on, the roads stay clear, their tax dollars are safe. So at the end of the day, you want to provide and protect the residents and your taxpayers the best way possible. And that doesn't mean you have to offload tons of money necessarily. It just means you have to build a culture that's aware and cautious of what they do day in and day out.
That's a great point. You mentioned water. You think about data, you just think about maybe a town hall, right? But water plants, how susceptible are they to, if a hacker can turn off the water flow, how critical that is. So, great point. I want to thank you for being here, Elisabeth. For our listeners or watchers, please, again, just remember you can get this podcast. Every couple of weeks, we come out with a new edition. We're on YouTube, we're on Spotify, and we're on the Apple platform. When you do watch or listen, please make sure you hit that like, share, or subscribe. It's important for us. We'll be back again in a couple of weeks with another great podcast. But this has been very enlightening, very educational. I really appreciate it. And I want to thank you and the folks at NYMIR for all you do to help protect local governments, because it's a serious issue and it's a growing issue and it's only going to get more complex. So thank you for all you do, and thank you for being here today.
Yes, and thank you again for having me. And again, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me, either, like I said, phone or email. And if you need my contact information, definitely I can provide it.
Thank you, Elisabeth. Appreciate it very much.
Thank you.